Hello, I'm Esther Githui Ewart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up.
The United Nations is allocating $100 million to support poorly funded humanitarian crisis. The United States vetoes an Arab-backed United Nations Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And in our technology report, a fashion label is creating a buzz in Washington with its edgy women's to men's wear and custom designs. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54.
The United Nations says it is allocating $100 million to be released from its Central Emergency Response Fund for Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo because those countries are coping with poorly funded humanitarian crisis. David Doyle has more.
The United Nations said on Tuesday it was allocating $100 million to support poorly funded humanitarian crises in 7 countries, including Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan. However, it said the funding, drawn from the UN's Central Emergency Response Fund, is the lowest amount since 2018. Aid organizations are grappling to attract donations amid a flurry of humanitarian crises. That includes Sudan's conflict between the army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. On Monday, the World Food Programme warned that the violence is sending thousands of families into Chad and South Sudan each week. At least 25 million people, like Mahida Ibrahim and her family who fled the war in Sudan in January, face increasing hunger and malnutrition.
What we need is food. The immediate support we need is to eat, to be able to survive.
In Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, escalating clashes between the army and the M23 rebel group have displaced hundreds of thousands of people and disrupted food supplies to the provincial capital Goma. However, global aid needs reached a high of almost $57 billion in 2023, as conflicts, including in Gaza, erupted around the world. That's according to the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, which said the disparity between needs and resources had reached an unprecedented level of $35 billion in unmet appeals for financial support. The dire reality, the UN agency said, is that donor funding is failing to keep up with humanitarian needs. In addition to Congo and Sudan, the emergency fund allocation will also be used for crisis response in Syria, Chad, Niger, Lebanon, and Honduras.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. A Democratic Republic of Congo President Felix Tshisekedi has accepted the resignation of Prime Minister Jean-Michel Sama Lukonde, triggering the dissolution of the government. No reasons were given for him stepping down. The Prime Minister tendered his resignation to President Tshisekedi 8 days after the validation of his mandate as a national deputy. He will now join Parliament as a member of the Assembly. According to Congo's constitution, the mandate of a national deputy is incompatible with being a member of the government. Tshisekedi has asked the government to continue handling affairs until a new one is formed. The United Nations Security Council has designated 6 individuals to be sanctioned for their destabilizing activities in Congo. Those sanctions are a general in the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, 2 senior leaders in the Ugandan armed group, Allied Democratic Forces, the military spokesman for the Rwandan-backed M23 rebel group, the leader of the National Coalition of the People for the Sovereignty of Congo, a Mai Mai group, and a commander of the armed group, Twirwaneho. These sanctions were issued during an emergency meeting of the Council where Rwanda was cited for fueling violence in Congo.
Rwanda must end its support to M23. It must also withdraw Rwandan forces from Congolese territory and immediately remove any and all of its surface-to-air missile systems, which credible reporting indicates have been responsible for intentionally firing on the aerial assets of MONUSCO.
The UN has appealed for $2.6 billion to assist nearly 9 million of the most vulnerable Congolese this year. Overall, there are more than 25 million people in need. For more on what the United Nations is doing to help displaced people in Congo, I'm joined live from New York by VOA UN correspondent Margaret Beshear. Hello, Margaret.
Hi there, Esther.
Now, with multiple crises around the world, how is the UN responding to Africa's humanitarian crisis, first in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan?
Well, as you heard in David's package, there'll be 20 million each for Sudan and DRC in that Central Emergency Fund release. That's part of that 100 million. It's being split among the 7 countries, so they're getting 20 million each. But that's a drop in the bucket. 2.6 billion is what the UN says it needs this year to meet the needs of only 9 million people in Congo. And they say that there are about 25 million in need, so 9 million are those who are most desperate. So it's a really sad situation because they can't even begin to meet the needs of everyone who needs help.
And Margaret, the bigger question is, what is the United Nations doing to de-escalate the violence by these armed groups in both of these countries?
Well, as you mentioned, the Council sanctioned 6 individuals on Tuesday for their destabilizing actions in the DRC in the east, of course, from the ADF, the FDLR, M23. So these guys will now face travel bans and asset freezes. Council is very concerned about the situation. France asked for this briefing on Tuesday to discuss what's going on. You know, as you may recall, about 10 years ago, there was a similar situation in the east, and the M23 was poised to take Goma at the time, but then they were kind of, beat down by the MONUSCO, by the UN peacekeeping force there with their intervention brigades and with the Congolese army, but now they have reared their head again and since 2022, and it's really causing a lot of misery and suffering in eastern DRC, and it's potentially a little bit scary because the UN is drawing down its peacekeeping force this year. They're beginning to leave. So if there's a security vacuum, that could go very badly if the Congolese army can't step in and provide the protection of civilians that's necessary.
And Margaret, very quickly, what are you learning from, in case of DRC, about the humanitarian organizations working there? What is their biggest concern?
Well, I think security is a big concern because they can't deliver if they're not safe. And there are many people in very hard to reach areas that they can't get to. And so they have multiple concerns. And of course, as always, it is a shortage of resources.
Right. Thank you so much. Margaret Beshear, our VOA correspondent at the UN headquarters, reporting live for us from New York. Israeli strikes across Gaza killed at least 67 Palestinians overnight and into Wednesday, including in areas where civilians have been told to seek refuge, according to the Associated Press. The Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital says it received 44 bodies after multiple strikes in central Gaza. The aid group Doctors Without Borders says that 2 people were killed when a shelter housing staff in the Gaza was struck during an Israeli operation. Meanwhile, the United States has again vetoed an Arab-backed UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports.
Israel continues strikes on Gaza's southern city of Rafah, near the border with Egypt, where more than 1 million Palestinians, some displaced multiple times by the war, seek safety. Their fate was discussed by diplomats in New York, where on Tuesday the United States again vetoed an Arab-backed UN resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. It's the third U.S. veto since Israel's military offensive on the Palestinian enclave that followed Hamas' October 7th attack on southern Israel. Palestinian UN envoy Riyad Mansour called the move reckless and dangerous.
Shielding Israel even as it commits the most shocking crimes, while exposing millions of innocent Palestinian civilians to its wrath and more untold horrors. It is not Israel that should be protected by the veto. It is Palestinian children, women, and men who must be protected by this Council acting now.
The U.S. proposed its own draft resolution that calls for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza up to 6 weeks, only after a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas is secured. The U.S. is pushing for the deal with Egypt and Qatar. It also condemns the October 7th attack and makes clear that Hamas has no place in future governance of Gaza.
In addition, our draft states there can be no reduction of territory in the Gaza Strip, and rejects, as we have before in Resolution 2720, any forced displacements of civilians in Gaza. It also highlights the concerns many council members have regarding the fate of civilians in Rafah, making clear that under current circumstances, a major ground offensive into Rafah should not proceed.
Skeptics see the U.S. resolution as a diplomatic ploy that would prolong Palestinian suffering. Israel has warned that unless the hostages held by Hamas are freed by the start of Ramadan on March 10th, it will push on with a ground offensive in Rafah.
Every day there are threats and statements. We don't know where to go.
However, the U.S. resolution does show Washington's hardening stance on Israel's conduct of the war.
This is the first time that the US has proposed a text which really does include some fairly strong implicit criticism of Israel's campaign in Gaza and the situation in the West Bank. And I think that the Biden administration may be sending a subtle sign that it will continue to protect Israel at the UN, but its patience is not limitless.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed not to bow to international pressure. This week, his war cabinet is meeting President Joe Biden's top advisor, Brett McGurk, who will push Israel to agree on the hostage deal and hold off from a ground campaign in Rafah. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken heads to Brazil this week for a G20 foreign ministers meeting where the wars in Ukraine and Gaza are expected to dominate talks. He will also meet with Brazil's president, whose views on the conflicts differ from the White House. Secretary Blinken will then travel to Argentina. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken headed to Brazil for the G20 foreign ministers meeting and talks on Wednesday with President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The independent-minded Brazilian leader has strongly criticized Israel's war on Hamas and the high number of Palestinian civilians killed. He had this to say on Sunday on a visit to Ethiopia.
What's happening in the Gaza Strip isn't a war. It's a genocide. It's not a war of soldiers against soldiers. It's a war between a highly prepared army and women and children.
At the State Department Tuesday, spokesperson Matthew Miller said the Biden administration disagrees with Lula's comments.
We have been quite clear that we do not believe that genocide has occurred in Gaza. We want to see the conflict ended as soon as practicable. We want to see humanitarian assistance increased in a sustained manner to innocent civilians in Gaza, but we do not agree with those comments.
One expert says Lula is trying to make his voice heard about matters over which his country has little influence.
He tried to punch above its weight, trying to influence the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, and there are limitations. We should recognize that Brazil, in terms of foreign policy, has no power excess, or has not strength to interfere in this area. On the contrary, we are very strong and we are a power, a world power in environment, in food security, or in energy transaction. We should concentrate on these areas.
Barbosa says he does not know why Lula has been silent on the political situation in neighboring Venezuela, a likely Blinken topic of discussion during the G20 foreign ministers meeting in Rio de Janeiro and his visit Friday to Argentina. Venezuelan's government and opposition met Monday in Caracas to discuss their differing views on the detention of a prominent human rights attorney and an agreement to work on conditions for a free and fair presidential election this year. On the eve of the G20 foreign ministers meeting, a top Brazilian diplomat said that conflicts around the world have reached the level of the Cold War and that global leaders need to adapt the international system to prevent new conflicts. In Argentina, Blinken will hold talks with its outspoken new president, Javier Milei, who is a staunch supporter of Israel. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Would like to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, Kenyan companies turn to artificial intelligence to reduce production and advertising expenses. We'll be right back.
This week on Straight Talk Africa, the 37th summit of the African Union gathered regional and world leaders in Ethiopia at a time when parts of the continent have experienced multiple coups and growing instability. The summit also addressed the need to build resilient education systems accessible to all. Join me, Hayley Adams, for a discussion on the role and significance of the African Union in building a stronger continent.
Women played a crucial role in the Sudanese revolution that eventually ousted President Omar al-Bashir. Women were also instrumental in the establishment of a new country, South Sudan. They are now calling for an end to fighting and hostilities that have persisted in both countries. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we'll hear the voices of women in Sudan and South Sudan who advocate for peace and stability. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced that the national election will be held on May 29th. Ramaphosa's ruling African National Congress is expected to face a stern test to retain its majority in South Africa's seventh fully democratic national election since the end of the apartheid system of forced racial segregation in 1994. Burkina Faso's governing junta is suspending the issuance of export permits for artisanal and semi-mechanized gold and other precious commodities. In a released statement, the junta says it is looking to, quote, clean up the sector. The government has a desire to better organize the marketing of gold and other precious substances, according to the government statement. And 15 candidates in Senegal's delayed presidential election are accusing President Macky Sall of ill will and say they will take action to ensure a new poll date is swiftly established. The collective is calling for an election to be held before April 2nd, when Sall's term officially runs out. Kenyan companies facing economic challenges are turning to artificial intelligence to reduce production and advertising expenses. That's causing anxiety among artists and ad agencies who fear reduced income and job losses if AI can replace the work they've always done. Mohammed Yusuf reports from Nairobi.
With the coming of artificial intelligence, Kenyan companies and businesses have been quick to incorporate computer-controlled robots for various tasks to save time and costs. Kartasi Products, one of the biggest publishing companies based in Nairobi, is among those embracing AI technology. Instead of relying on outside artists, the company now uses AI to handle book covers, texting and layout, and has cut product design time by 2/3 from approximately 3 months to 1.
Because everything is within your fingertips. So you find that you don't only save on time, but also you save on cost, because you don't have to hire out any services. So at the moment we are saving, the cost savings that we are getting from AI it is translated into the final product.
David Karega, the head of East and Southern Africa at Woodrow, a communications firm, says AI helps companies reach out to their customers.
With AI, where organizations, institutions, and companies are starting to look at AI in the sense of, how can it help me in this moment where my budgets are cut to still continue doing, effective communications. And what I've observed is AI becoming a kind of a value creator, and you can look at it being a value creator both from an agency perspective and from a client perspective, or the company.
The adoption of AI is creating fear among artists and advertising agencies that revenue and jobs will continue to shrink. Simon Mwanzia, creative chief for one such agency, the Arts Group, acknowledges the trend and the cost benefits, though he thinks companies will be better off relying on professionals to handle their advertising.
All the design work is done in-house, so that means that's less revenue for the agency. So we'll definitely take a hit. But we do not foresee a situation where companies do that, because we always emphasize and also try to advocate for that. People need to focus on their key strengths.
Currently, AI programs used in advertising often create deformed creatures and worldly scenes that require many hours to edit. However, the World Advertising Research Center says spending by Africa's advertising sector fell by 11.6% last year, an indication of the likely increased use of AI. Mohammed Yusuf, VOA News, Nairobi.
Tesla Concepts, a fashion label founded in 2005 by Nigerian-born fashion icon Tessie Olise Amaize, is creating a buzz in Washington with its edgy women's to men's wear, custom designs, and consignment services. The Tesla brand creates high-quality, timeless, professionally tailored, classic, and avant-garde pieces. Tessie's journey has been challenging. To learn more about her fashion label, VOA technology correspondent Paul Ndiho spoke with the creative director of Tesla Concepts.
Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
You are a rising star when it comes to fashion. Your fashion label is cutting across. You're trying to make your mark around the world. Tell us more about your label.
I'm from Nigeria, and I'm the creative director of Tesla. I studied fashion in England. And after my studies in England, I moved back to Nigeria to establish my brand called Tesla. And ever since then, it has been amazing. In less than a year, I moved back to Nigeria. I won an award at the Nigerian Fashion Show. It was a nationwide competition held by legendary Gold, Lexi Mojo. So they were searching for the next talent in the whole of Nigeria. And we know how big Nigeria is. So it was nationally televised. And I was so happy. At the end of the competition, I won the award as the best designer in the whole of Nigeria. And ever since then, my brand has been showcased all over Nigeria and outside Nigeria.
Tell me a little bit about how you make some of this stuff. Where do you create it here in the United States, or you have like a store somewhere in Nigeria where you make all your designs?
Yes, I do. They are handmade in the United States of America. I work with local artisans here in the United States of America, and I have my internet. I have my social media platforms, Instagram, where people can look at what I do and they place an order, contact me via email in any form, and I get it across to them. And we ship worldwide as well.
What does it take for a person like you from Nigeria to be competing on a global stage?
That's a good question. As you can see, Africa, or Nigeria to be precise, is a place where we find a whole lot of great talents coming out of Africa and Nigeria, to be precise. And what it takes is creativity. And in Africa, we've got a whole lot of creativity in Africa. Looking at things right now, Africa is like the next big thing. When you talk about our music, our food, and fashion is becoming the next big thing. So in that area, being a Nigerian, I just believe that the world is expecting a whole lot from us, and being a Nigerian, by God's willing, it will be great to take over.
I was browsing over your website, and I saw some really amazing stuff there. What does it take to make some of that stuff?
At the moment, Tesla, I would say, it's considered like a bespoke fashion house, where things are being tailored based on your specifications. If you want something that, oh yes, I want this in blue, I want this in red, we give people that liberty to be able to have things they want the way they want it. So we co-design with people. So in Tesla concept is one of the things that we consider a lot in Tesla, by working with our clients and making sure that we make things based on their specifications. And in the other hand, it takes a whole lot. Sometimes people think that, oh, fashion is just something that it takes in 1 minute, it's gone. There's a whole lot of creativity that goes behind what we do in Tesla Concepts, and it takes a whole lot of days or months, depending on the designs and what you actually want. But it's not difficult to get you what you want.
You use a lot of social media. You are a tech lady to promote your products. How much traffic do you get of people looking at your stuff?
In Tesla, we make things that are very creative and at the same time edgy. So social media, as we all know now, is the next big thing. If you want to buy anything online, the first thing you do, you go to social media. Okay, where can I get this? Who is this? Who can I what contacts to get things? And we use social media a lot, which drives traffic to our websites and at the same time to our Instagram handles. And at the moment in the United States of America, I do strictly online and I ship worldwide.
Well, Tessie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That was Tessie Olise Amaize. She spoke to VOA's technology correspondent, On Diho. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.